Välkomna in allihopa. Vi kommer strax att sätta igång. Sådär, varmt välkomna till Apologia live ikväll. Mitt namn är Martin Helgesson och jag arbetar på Apologia främst med våra distanskurser. Men också som värd för Apologia live och andra digitala initiativ i Apologia Centrum för kristen apologetik. Apologia live är en serie fristående webbinar som vi gör där vi då och då bjuder in talare, ibland från vårt eget team och ibland internationella gäster för att ta upp en aktuell och intressant fråga som har med kristen tro och kristen apologetik att göra. De här evenemangen är till för att utrusta och uppmuntra oss alla i att ha en genomtänkt kristen tro och att vara skickliga i att dela den med andra människor runt omkring oss. Och ikväll så är ämnet The Crisis of Western Christianity och som ni förstår av titeln så kommer huvuddelen av kvällens program vara på engelska. Det är bara introduktionen här som är på svenska. Vår huvudtalare ikväll är JP Moreland som är professor i filosofi på Talbot School of Theology, en del av Biola Universitetet i Los Angeles. För er som är nyfikna på JP Moreland och vill veta mer om honom och vad han har skrivit för böcker och annat så kan ni kolla i chatten så ligger där en länk till hans CV och förteckning av alla böcker han är författare till och medförfattare till. JP Moreland kommer att intervjuas av Mats Selander på ämnet och efter intervjun kommer det vara en liten kort paus där jag ger lite information om vad som är på gång i Apologia. Och sedan blir det tid för frågor, era frågor, Q&A som vi säger. Och vi kommer att hålla på fram till klockan 8, då är hela programmet slut. Så med det sagt så ska vi introducera kvällens talare och intervjuare lite mer. Dr. Moreland and Mats, if you would turn on your cameras and unmute yourselves, I will hand it over to you, Mats.
Thank you so much for that, Martin. Well, it is my extremely joyful pleasure to introduce, honestly, my favorite philosophy professor, JP. I will not take any formal bio on you or anything like that. Martin put that in the chat. I want to introduce you more personally. JP, you're the kind of philosopher that integrates spiritual life, Christian thinking, and philosophy and theology in such a thrilling way. I always get so inspired by you, honestly. I mean, now I sound like an American, but this is my Swedish honest.
Well, God forbid that would happen.
Exactly. but yeah, I remember one time you were teaching metaphysics. You were talking about substances and those kind of things. And then suddenly you said, and now I'm going to tell you why this is important for your prayer life. And everyone goes like, whoops, is this important for my prayer life? This way of integration is just beautiful. And that's why it's such an honor for me to have you with us in Apologia and also to be able to interview you. So with that said, people will find out for themselves the kind of person you are and the way you respond to questions and your mind and your heart. We love to have you. Thank you for being with us.
Well, Mats, I have loved you for years, and just your warmth and your keen mind and so on, and your heart have meant a lot to me. And, you know, for me, this is ultimately all about trying to lead a good, flourishing life of wisdom and character that brings honor to the Lord Jesus. That's what it's about. So if philosophy doesn't have some impact on the way I live, you know, I'd probably rather be doing something else. So it seems pretty obvious to me.
Yeah. Yes. There you go. Yes. Thank you. And in Sweden, we live in I think, constant feeling of crisis among Christians. And I guess you have more and more of that feeling in the US as well. We've lived with that for a longer time than American Christians, I believe. And there's quite a lot of hopelessness and feeling of almost despair, I think, among Swedish Christians. So therefore, we invited you to pick your brain. And now my son comes. Nej, Daniel, inte, för nu jobbar jag. Du måste prata med mamma. Inte nu. Du får prata med mamma. Daniel, prata med mamma. Du får inte. Jag jobbar nu. Gå nu. You see, well, it's hard to be such a popular dad.
That's great.
So, I mean, we just have this feeling of despair in Sweden. Right. This feeling, what are we going to do with the situation? And I'd love to ask you this question, JP. Yes. What? There's a crisis, definitely. How would you describe it? What is it? What is it really that's going on, according to you?
It's a very good question, and I think I would say two things. But the first one is the emergence in Western Europe and now North America that science and science alone has the authority to tell us about reality. If something can be tested in the hard sciences, physics, chemistry, then you can know it. There's no faith or anything like that, but claims outside of the hard sciences, claims in philosophy or ethics or theological claims are non-cognitive, and people have trouble giving their lives to something that they have no confidence is really true. And that's why the idea of blind faith, where you just have to choose to believe something in the absence of any reason to believe it, will not sustain a person over a lifetime. It just won't. Religion will be a hobby. And so the emergence of what we might call scientific naturalism, with the response in the humanities of sort of a post-modern constructivism, both imply that when it comes to claims about God or whatever it might be, you just can't know if there's a truth there. Maybe there is, but nobody can know it, so it doesn't make any difference. Now, I want to keep going on this for a second. A number of years ago, there was an article published called Europe's Two Culture Wars. And the thesis of the article was, because Europe has lost one culture war, it isn't even fighting the second one. Now, what was the first one? The first one was against the encroachment of scientism, which is the idea that science alone gives us knowledge. I love science. I was a physical chemist, but it's not the only thing that gives us knowledge. I'm sorry. Because of the secularization of Europe, due to a change in Europe's view of knowledge as limited to the sciences, then religion was viewed as nothing more than a hobby. All right, so it lost that war. But now the second one is against the onslaught of Islam into Europe. And Europe is losing that struggle because it doesn't take religion, including Islam, seriously.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, how could you? It's just a hobby. It's kind of like if you like ice cream or some other kind of dessert. It's just a matter of taste. And surely these Muslims get that. Well, the Muslims don't see religion as a hobby. They think it's true and it can be known. And so the secularization of Western culture has been the number one thing that's happened, and that centers on the fact that there can be no knowledge of God. It's only blind faith. Now, the second thing is the explosion since 1970 of Book of Acts style miracles all over the world. I have a book coming out in October, mid-October. It's going to be called A Simple Guide to Experiencing the Supernatural, where I have documented and vetted thoroughly 5 kinds of miracles that are happening all over the world today. And there is an explosion of the supernatural. It's undeniable. But it doesn't happen in Western cultures, not because they know so much that they realize that what kind of ignorant Christians in the quote third world, quote end quote, they believe these are miracles, but we know there's a scientific explanation for them. Well, baloney, that's not true. But that's not why. It's that the church has lost its expectation, and it doesn't know how to recapture expectation of God acting and healing and doing other things like that. And so in this book that comes out in October, I'm going to explain how to regain that expectation. And I won't go into it now, but I'll summarize by saying that the crisis is that the church has absorbed the idea that you can't have knowledge about life's most important questions because they can't be tested scientifically, supposedly. And as a result, it's lost its confidence in power and in the power of God. And so we are being secularized.
And these two things, they stick together, because believing in a God that performs miracles is to believe in a real God that actually can confirm his existence and his love and so forth in a very empirical way, directly.
Absolutely. This is happening all over the world. It's in America, it's happening. And there's been an outbreak, according to mission organization after mission organization after mission. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Before Dallas Willard died, he told me, JP, something absolutely astounding is happening all over the world. And it started around 1970. And God is just at work. And this is why, Mats, in Sweden and of course in America, you have liberal theology that is revisionist. And it's the theologian's job, every time scientists make a pronunciation, to wave the white flag of surrender and to revise Christianity so it's not making any claims that might conflict with quote unquote science. Now, I think it's not conflicting with science, it's conflicting with what people claim science says. But so you have a liberal theology is nothing but the secularization and the de-supernaturalization of Christianity. And I mean, who wants to go listen to that? I'd rather watch a sporting event or go to a bar and.
Well, looked like you got stuck in the bar, JP. It looked like you got stuck in the bar. You told us you rather go to a bar and then you just froze.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Well, I meant that if Christianity is not true,
yeah,
then why pay any attention to it?
Yeah, exactly. Just briefly, many evangelical Christians rejoices over postmodernism. At least when I went to seminar, it was like, yeah, that's the hot new thing. Postmodernism, that opens up the field for us again. Well, personally, I doubt that. What's your take on that?
Well, it opens up the field by burning the field. So we get a place at the table, but everybody at the table is just sharing their narrative. That's true for them and real for them, but nobody is allowed to make any claims about what is actually real and true and what can be known to be true. And that ends up with a kind of cultural relativism. So you win with postmodernism by accepting the dictum that you can be at the table as long as you don't claim your view's true and your picture of reality is actually real, and you can know that it's true. Well, what do you have left? So you have private taste.
So you're invited to the table, but only to the kids' table, not to the grown-ups where the real stuff is going on.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
In your mind, what are the key factors that would have made it possible for the church to resist this secular onslaught?
Well, what happened in Europe was, as I pointed out, with the Reformation, the unity of European nations was destroyed because the Catholic Church provided some kind of unity to Europe, even though there were different nation states emerging and gaining autonomy. But with the Reformation, you could not look at religion to unify Europe. So in the place of religion, it became epistemology, believe it or not. And there was an explosion of philosophers who wrote books on epistemology, hoping that would provide a way to unify Europe. Now, the epistemology that won, and it was actually the worst epistemology, was empiricism. And the reason it won is because it was just kind of simple. Well, basically, if you can see it, then it's real. But it couldn't account for mathematics or logic and all kinds of things, including self-consciousness, which I am disgustingly invisible. My mind is. But and so it doesn't withstand scrutiny. It's self-refuting. If the only thing you can know is what you can test with your senses, then that statement itself is not capable of being empirically tested. But it still won, and as a result, it turned Europe into an increasingly secular culture. Now, what the church did was to retreat, and to retreat to religious experience and to blind faith. Kant promoted blind, ungrounded faith, and he thought that was what faith ought to be. It can't rest on reason. That's a wrong approach. And Schleiermacher and others in the liberal theology
Nu tappade vi JP igen. Vi hoppas han kommer tillbaks. JP, we lost you again.
Yes.
Schleiermacher and the liberal theology guys.
They said we ground our faith on emotion. And while emotion is important, what the church needed to do was to regain its use of reason and argumentation to respond to the criticisms being raised against Christian teaching, like what you're doing. I mean, we need 100,000 ministries like yours all over Europe. And so I think if the church can recapture the value of the life of the mind. Doesn't mean everybody's got to be a scholar, because we all have different gifts, but everybody needs to value that someone is doing it. An example, I am not directly active in caring for and feeding the poor, but our church does that, and I am very, very committed to our body doing it. But my gifting is in a different area, so I value that. It doesn't mean that I'm the one that does it, but we all need to recapture the value of the importance of the life of the mind, and all of us can kick our game up a little bit. And so the good news is, Mats, that we're living in a day when there has been a delightful explosion of rigorous Christian apologetics and philosophy and historical evidences. I've been a believer 52 years, and I have never lived at a time when there are more New Testament scholars that accept the historicity of the New Testament documents and the miracles and resurrection of Jesus. And so these are not days to be retreating. These are days to be pushing forward.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes. To follow up, what should we do today to revert or at least resist cultural secular pressure? What is your most important advice, especially now when we live in a post-Christian era in Sweden? The life of the mind, you talk about the supernatural to actually regain an expectation. Is that the things you want to emphasize again, or are there some other things as well?
Well, I would say that we need to do a better job of training people as to why they believe what they believe, and not just what to believe, but why. To give people reasons for what they hold. And this is especially true for what we call middle and high school. I don't know, 12 years old and up, and even younger. So that would be something important. Having conferences, having podcasts, having radio programs that do these things, having Sunday school classes in the church that will spend 8 weeks on, here's some answers to some basic questions we get, that kind of thing. Secondly, I do think that the vineyard movement, vineyard churches, and there are problems with the vineyard, but I go to a vineyard church because it really has retained an expectation of the supernatural. And I've seen more stuff in my church that is bona fide real miracles than I did my whole Christian life before I started attending a vineyard, although I saw some supernatural things earlier. So I'm trying to read about this and learn about it. Lee Strobel's book, A Case for Miracles, it is so good. It is really, really good. The next thing is that I think
it's actually translated into Swedish, and I wrote a review on it in one of the Christian magazines.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that, Maya.
It's translated. So, it's a good one.
Such good news. Such good news. I would say third and finally, we need to restore what I call extravagant worship in the church. And that means that we need to turn to some of the good contemporary Christian music. I believe in the old hymns. I'm not saying it should be either or, but we need to appropriate some of the real good worship music that has been established, because what we want to do is to create an atmosphere where people can experience the very presence of God, both individually but collectively when we gather together. So we need to think about how to facilitate experiencing God's presence, and we need to learn from this new wave of worship that has had a really positive effect. There, of course, with any movement, you're going to find some problems, but I'm overall very pleased with what it's done for Christians.
Yeah, something happens with the mic there. Did you put? Yeah, there. That's better. Thank you. Many Christians are in Sweden, especially among the Pentecostals and the revival, the former revival movements. Many are like waiting for a revival, waiting for God to come and touch the country again. And there's two sides to that. I mean, one thing is, yeah, it's only God that can do it. On the other hand, of course, what are we supposed to do? What is the correct division of labor when it comes to revival, and what is revival? Because we've had these charismatic waves of Christians experiencing nice things, but we haven't seen much fruit in society from it. Not much evangelism, not much, society has not been touched really. How to think about all this? Do you?
Well, yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
just another good question. Well, let's start with my view of God and our responsibility. The scriptures talk about us being co-laborers. And so I see God and us both counting. Now, what that means is that if we don't act with God, then there will be less happen than if God acts alone, because this is not a puppet show. He put us here to make real choices that make real differences in the world. So we count. What that entails that if I just wait for God, then I am unbalanced in my understanding, and there will be things that won't happen. But the second thing is that every year I should look, like around New Year's, let's say, I should look back over my life the last 12 months and ask this question. Is the effect that's been produced by my life greater than can be explained by me as its sole cause? Do I need to appeal to another hand that has been working with me over the last year to rationally explain the results of the fruits of my efforts in my ministry? And the key is that we want to be able to see that. And so it's a both and, not an either or. Now, revival is the same way. One of the great experts on revival, Richard Lovelace, who's passed away now, he made the point that revivals never last if it is not accompanied with a renewal of Christian thinking and Christian theologizing about the issues of the day. Now, awakenings and revivals have actually had huge social impacts. If you study the three major awakenings in America, there were just incredible things that happened in society. Crime went down, and I could go on and on. But if you want this to last, then you have to engage in reflection. I would also say, Mats, that often when a revival takes place, it isn't because people are passively waiting for it, but that there are certain things they're doing that create the conditions for the revival to come. I'll give you an illustration. Electricity was around before we discovered how to use it. But we were not able to tap into its power because we could not meet the conditions that were needed for that power to be released. Now, once we discovered how to harness it, I can flip a light switch and the power of electricity is released. The power isn't coming from me, but I have to meet the conditions necessary to release the power. And what we've learned is that when many revivals came, it wasn't that people were waiting, but they were beginning to meet the conditions. They were beginning to cry out. They were beginning to repent, seek God actively, not passively. They were willing to begin to stand against their culture publicly. And then God, the switch was flipped and God poured out an awakening where, I mean, people started getting saved and all kinds of crazy things started happening that was just out of control. And that's good stuff, I mean, in a good way. So I think that the people that are waiting for revival have the wrong understanding of how this works. We are to be laboring with everything we have, but we're smart enough to know that we can't do this alone. There's got to be another hand working with us. Our efforts will count for something if God isn't working with us, okay? But it's not like we don't do anything on our own. But I'd much rather have God working with me than me going it alone. So I don't just sit around and wait for God to write my books. But when I sit down to write, I do pray, Lord Jesus, help me. Please, if you give me thoughts and help me.
Thank you. It's so valuable to listen to a Christian who believes in the miraculous God, who believes in revival, and who is a academic philosopher and trained theologian. Like, I mean, it's kind of unusual. I love it, JP. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I think I'm done with this, actually, and I think there's people who are very eager to
let's do it.
Yes, to ask you some questions. I turn over to you, Martin, and you'll just read the questions and take care of it from now. And then in the end, I'll just come and say goodbye to you.
Yes, excellent. Before we get started with the Q&A, I will just give a few brief points of information for the audience, and you just take a breather, Dr. Moreland, and we'll get going soon. Så jag tar lite information på svenska för er som är med här ikväll. Några saker som vi vill att ni ska känna till som är på gång i Apologia. Det första är att vi kommer att ha 4 stycken distanskurser under höstterminen. De börjar i slutet av augusti. Informationen är inte uppdaterad på hemsidan än, men jag lägger en länk i chatten så att ni kan kolla på den och hålla utkik. Det kommer att vara 4 kurser i apologetik. En grundkurs i apologetik, en kurs om apologetik för föräldrar, en kurs i kristen själavård och en kurs med bibelöversikt och bibelsyn. Jag vill passa på att lyfta fram 2 stycken böcker som är högaktuella, inte minst utifrån kvällens ämne. Den första är Det anstötliga evangeliet av Mats Selander. Och jag lägger en länk till den i chatten också. Det här är en bok som handlar om farorna när kristenheten försöker anpassa evangeliet för att passa in i kulturen och inte längre förkunnar hela evangeliet. Den andra boken jag vill passa på att tipsa om ikväll är Stefan Gustafssons bok Här för att stanna. Som verkligen kan vara ett bra tips för dig som vill ha ny inspiration, nytändning i ditt liv som kristen. Och båda de här böckerna vore ju utmärkt sommarläsning. Tredje och sista saken jag vill säga till er allihopa är att om du tycker att sånt här som vi gör ikväll och i övrigt apologia är viktigt, så vill vi be dig om hjälp. Vi behöver givare som är med och via engångsgåvor eller kanske genom regelbundet givande är med och bär upp vårt arbete som behövs i Sverige. Så ta en titt på den sista länken jag just la upp för att se hur du kan hjälpa oss att föra detta vidare ut till fler. And that was it for the information. I'm just going to explain for everyone how the Q&A will work. So you can see at the bottom of the Zoom window, there's a Q&A button. And if you press that, you will see a little panel where you can type in your question. Please type in questions rather than comments. If you want to comment on something, you can do that in the chat, but please keep the Q&A for questions. Try and keep your questions brief. That will increase the likelihood of us raising them, giving them to Dr. Moreland. You may type your question in Swedish or English. If you type it in Swedish, I will do my best to translate it. And if you type it into any other language, we may have mixed results. So Swedish or English questions. And with that, we will get going. Oh, one more thing, sorry. Everyone can also open the Q&A panel to vote for questions. And I will mostly pick the questions that have received the most votes. So do go ahead and get your questions in. And we have 25 minutes or so remaining in which I will feed those questions to Dr. Moreland. JP, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's get going. Okay, First question here. I have worked in Africa, South Sudan and Kenya mainly, and according to my experience, they believed in physical healing, but not in economical miracles. In the Western world, economical miracles are quite common, but not physical healing. Do you have a comment on that?
Well, I think that there are more physical healings in America than one might think. There has been a resurgence of healing in America, though it is not like what is happening in China, South America, Asia, or Africa. I'll grant you that. I think the other thing is that I would say that if this statistic is correct, what it shows is, number one, that people in the different cultures are probably praying more for certain things than others. Americans probably just look to medicine, but they do pray about financial situations. Whereas in Africa, they are in great need of physical healing, but they don't think to pray for economic miracles. That's just not the way they think. So I think what you pray for does affect how often that is granted. And I would say that there might just be different enculturations that limit what people even think to pray about. So that would be my take on that. And it would also include expectations are probably different in those two different cultures in different areas of prayer.
Okay, thank you. Question from Daniel here. How do you activate a whole church to be a co-laborer with Christ and not just passively wait for revival, especially when there's a lack of hunger among many of the members?
Well, Daniel, that is a really, really good question, and there's no simple answer to it, but my view is that you have to start small. And so if you can find a small group of adults in the church that would like to learn how to engage in apologetics and are willing to begin to outreach, either through learning how to share the gospel, or perhaps starting a ministry to care for the poor, or I'm going to say a ministry that helps couples that are struggling in their marriages. And you start that way, and then you begin to have them recruit other people, and you grow in that way. I would say that you want to be careful not to create a church split if you can. And it would be awfully nice if you could start with the pastor, the senior pastor, who would be on your team. The problem is a lot of times they're not. And so you don't want to usurp his leadership, but you can say, Pastor, I have a group of people that and I'd like to start a little study with them, maybe in my home every Thursday night, or perhaps in the church before the service. Would that be okay with you? I think the other thing that in America, there's a saying that says you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But you can feed it salt. And what I mean by that is that you have to find ways to create a need in people to want to be engaged, so they can't sit in their complacency. So you have to, if you teach or talk, you have to tell stories or take articles from the newspaper, what you've seen on television, that show what is happening to their children or grandchildren because of the church's inactivity. And so what I will do is I'll cite an example of where an atheist took this good couple's kids and they lost their faith. And what would the parent, and I would say, here's one of the things the atheist said, what would you say if you were a parent? Well, they don't know what to say. And then they feel the frustration. And then I say, well, lesson one. And I'll tell you what you could have said. So if you can expose them to goods they care about that are being harmed by the church's laziness and inactivity, that can help to motivate them to want to protect those goods by becoming active. Hard question.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. What's your take on Jordan B. Peterson? Do you think he brings people closer to the gospel or not?
Oh, that's hard because I think that he is presenting a good response to what I consider to be the secular progressive craziness that is now on the university campuses and in the media. And he calls it the way it is. And I'm grateful that he is speaking into those situations. So that's a good thing. So if the question is, am I glad that Peterson is accomplishing things for the common good? Yes. Now, what about Christianity? I'd say the first thing is a lot of the things Peterson is defending are consistent with Christian biblical teaching, though he doesn't necessarily cite, he uses common sense. But if you go to the scriptures, for example, that there's a certain thing a marriage is, and it's heterosexual unity, and Peterson is defending that view. So that creates a plausibility structure in a culture for the reception of Christian ideas, even though they don't know it's a Christian idea. Now, in terms of the gospel, I have mixed feelings. And he claims that it's hard to make sense out of life without God. I think that he is opening people up to consider the transcendent, and I think that's important. He has a great deal of respect for Jesus and so on. On the other hand, I think that his approach to people can be a little bit alienating. And I think that because he doesn't go all the way and make a lot of these things really dependent on a deeper question, namely, where do I stand with the Creator? I think that might mislead people into thinking that ultimate question is not important. So I have kind of mixed feelings about that aspect of him. Is he a Christian? I don't know. I don't know. Some days I think maybe he is, and other days I think he isn't. I don't know about that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Switching gears here a little bit. What is your take on critical realism? Can it be used as a way forward for Christian scholars?
Yes, very much so. Critical realism can have the term realism is all over the map in philosophy, but I'll just give you two ways I understand it. Critical realism is, first of all, an epistemological doctrine that says that we have access to the external world and that we can have reasonable and knowable beliefs about reality as it is in itself. This is in contrast to some kind of epistemic constructivism where I do not make contact with my noetic faculties with the real world, but rather my faculties in some sense construct the objects of my thought and my perceptions. So of course, the Bible assumes that we were put here to know God's world and him. And the Bible is not a book of skepticism. It claims that we have knowledge of reality. And so, yes, that's consistent. Now, if we take critical realism as a metaphysical doctrine, it basically says that the world, there is a mind-independent world, quote unquote, out there. It is what it is, whether we are looking at it or thinking about it. And our job is to conform our minds to it, not to create a world with our minds. So Kant said that whatever's out there, the noumena, have to conform to the categories of the intuition and the understanding, and we construct the thing in itself, thing to us. But critical realism metaphysically says, no, the world is what it is, no matter what you believe or think about it. Well, that's a big deal for us, because I mean, if people can create a God in their own image all they want, but if God is real and isn't like that, I'm sorry, you are mistaken. And so I think those are very important. One of the things I think critical to all this is knowledge by acquaintance, or simple seeing. That we do not see the world through our presuppositions, but we have direct access to the world.
Thank you. Okay, Sweden is very secular today, but because of a large Muslim immigration to Sweden, questions of faith are now in the center again. How can Christians use this situation to advocate a Christian worldview and the gospel?
Oh, what a good question.
I know.
Well, I think this gives us an opportunity to seize the moment and to speak into this new scene. Because what this does, this encroachment of Islam and the religious question being raised now, this raises the question, how do you decide among these competing another? And the greatest
sorry
evil,
JP, we lost you for 25 seconds there. Competing was the last word that I heard, at least.
Okay, between these competing religious systems, how do we decide among them? And they can't both be true, because they contradict one another. The greatest sin in Islam is to claim Jesus Christ was God and to accept the Trinity and salvation by grace. In Christianity, that is central to they can't both be right. So that raises the question, then, how do we decide? And I suggest that the way you decide is by thinking carefully and assessing the evidence for and against each religion, and make your decision based on the evidence. So what this does is it raises, by the resurgence of Islam, it raises the question of religious pluralism and deciding among the competitors. And it gives us a chance to say, we have an idea about how to do that. You assess the evidence as best you can for the different religions you're considering, and see which one makes most sense and is more likely to be true on the evidence. And I would say that the evidence for the reliability of, say, the New Testament documents is overwhelmingly stronger than that for the Quran. There just is no evidence for Quran, except for the fact that it's so beautifully written, which Arabic scholars have said it really isn't that beautifully written. So that would, yes, we can use that situation.
Great. Would you agree that the environmentalist movement is a form of secular religion?
There's no question about it. Francis Schaeffer, who was a Christian thinker in the 70s, saw what was coming. And he said that the environmental movement that was beginning then was actually turning to Buddhism to justify the concern for the environment. And the reason was because all is ultimately one. And so I am, in some sense, one with the universe, and thus we are on equal standing and we should care for it. Now, what the environmental movement didn't realize is that, yes, Buddhism does make us equal to the rest of creation, but it does so by devaluing both. So it doesn't hold us with high value and raise the value of creation up to that level. No, it says creation doesn't matter. And since we're one with creation, we don't either. And so the Buddhist solution is actually the cure that killed the patient. It makes the universe ultimately non-existent. It's an illusion. It's Maya. It's not actually real. And so the fundamental Buddhist teaching is withdrawal from any desire, including the desire to cure the environment. Now, what a Christian will do, and I've got an article that's actually coming out in a book, a secular book, probably this November, called Dissenting Philosophers. And we're not all Christians in there, but that's okay. We're all against this progressive leftism. And I make the point that in a Christian social ethic, you have a hierarchy of things that are more important than others. And the environment is important to us, but it is a low priority compared to abortion, preserving the traditional family, and caring for the poor and needy. So while it is a value, it is not as high a value as other things that we should be committing ourselves to. Moreover, we also believe as Christians that concern for the environment needs to be balanced over against concern for the economy and how people will be able to thrive in an economy that's overly committed to environmentalism, and that eating meat is not wrong and things of that sort. So I do think you're right. I think that the contemporary environmental movement has no real basis for being concerned about the environment. There's no objective reason they can give you for why we ought to care about that. So I think they're overboard. I think they've elevated it to the status that makes it priority number one. And I don't think that makes sense.
Johannes asks, what are your best tips for bringing up children in a radically secular culture?
Very good question. And to me, there are two answers to that. The first one is that if you take a careful look at the fall of Adam and Eve, take a careful look at what happened there, you discover that the fundamental need that we have is attachment to God, not character development or discipleship. Both are important, but the fundamental thing God does is he doesn't ask us to get cleaned up before he connects to us. He takes us the way we are, and he establishes an intimate connection with us. And within that context, then he works on our maturity and growth. So what this means is my first job as a parent is not to protect my kids from cultural ideas or to make sure their behavior is in conformity with biblical teaching. Those are important, but my first priority is to provide a stable, warm, loving object of attachment so that they know that they're safe and that they're loved and treasured. And so hugging and kissing your children expressing warmth and love to them is job number one. And then job number two would be the other aspects, which are important. The second thing is that parents need to read some simple apologetics books to get down some arguments for the things that their kids are going to be challenged, and start teaching kids from an early age appropriate reasons for believing in Christianity. And if they raise a question, encourage that. Don't shame them. Let them ask anything they want. If you don't know what the answer is, then say, that's a good question, and we'll talk about that in a week or so. Then you go look it up online and try to find out what to say, but always get back to them and affirm the value of them asking questions, because otherwise they'll stuff it and it'll bottle up inside, and that's not going to help anybody. So learn how to answer and anticipate the things they're going to get and how to respond to them in an age appropriate way. And those are some things that you can do.
Wonderful, thank you. Do you have time for one more?
I do.
All right, and we'll come full circle and let Mats ask the final question here, which he has typed in. There are many Christian intellectuals that are kind of skeptical about miracles. What's your view of that?
Well, I think that they've been too secularized, and I think that they have not exposed themselves to the overwhelming outbreak of credible accounts of I don't believe everything I read, but I know that there are credible accounts, like Craig Keener's 2-volume set, the hernia-inducing 2-volume set, of like, I don't know, 1,600 pages. And he is one of the world's leading researchers, and he's documenting miracles all over the world. So now my attitude, Mats and Martin, is I don't want to be gullible and I don't want to be skeptical. I want to be wise, and I don't just believe any kind of miracle story that I hear. But on the other hand, I don't require a level of proof that is so high that nothing can pass it. Like the idea that you have to have medical evidence for a healing miracle. Why would anybody believe something like that? We accept all kinds of things based on eyewitness testimony in a court of law. We send people to the death penalty without medical evidence. We do it on the basis of sometimes eyewitness testimony and circumstantial evidence. And if you have a bunch of people who saw a guy, as has happened in our church, who was blinded, his eye was frozen like it was a marble, and after 30 minutes of prayer, his eye was completely restored to health. And his wife, I contacted his wife, and she told me that he had been blinded in that eye for 15 years. And when that team prayed for them, and they all saw it come alive, his eyesight was restored, and he has never had the problem again. Now, I could say they're all lying to me, but that's ridiculous. I know some of these people personally, and they don't need to make up stories. I interviewed them. I contacted the wife, and that was enough credible eyewitness testimony to me. So I think that a lot of people just don't hang around the right people. They need to start looking into this, and you will find that people are experiencing these things.
What I'm thinking is that many Christian intellectuals, what I believe is that they have a fear of not being respected in the culture among their intellectual peers and those things. And this that's why I believe that the issue among Christian leaders that would distance themselves from miracles is something we need to you have to peel off the layers there and ask what's really going on there. And I that's what I believe. I think it's a fear of not being respected, and I think it's very deep. So that's what I
think you're
wanted
right.
you. That's what I wanted you to say.
Well, and I would have if you'd given me more time. But I think you're right, Mats. And I mean, when I went into my graduate work in philosophy, I made first of all, I made a commitment to truth.
Yeah.
That was fundamental. If I found out Christianity wasn't true, I'd leave it. Okay, fair enough. So my commitment was to truth, but I wasn't 50-50. I already had good reasons to think this was true. So I made a commitment and I said, Lord Jesus, I care about your approval of me and the great ones in the history of our people. I want Augustine to be proud of me. I'd like the Apostle Paul to think I've done a good job. And if the guys in the academy don't like me, that's their issue. They can say all they want about me if I know that I'm doing the best work I can. And I just don't care. And I've never cared what they think about me. And I've earned a pretty good reputation. But it's because my work I've worked hard, and now I've published enough where they can't dismiss me. But I never tried to get favor with anybody in the academy, because quite frankly, if you look at the professors in general, it's kind of a messed up group of people. And why would I care about what a group of messed up people that are agenda driven think about me? I'd rather my grandkids love me, I got 5 of them. So there you go. Well, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Moreland. On a final note, there's been a question, or I should probably rather call it a request, that more of your Biola University lectures be made available online. So people are hoping for that. I don't know if you have an answer to that, if you know if they will be made available, more of your work, more of your lectures.
I can barely use a cell phone. So, I'm not. I'll do what I can to mention it, but
excellent. Well,
I never
thank you so much.
Other people do it. So
yeah.
Thank you. Good to see you, Mats.
Thank you, JP.
I love you, brother.
Yeah,
nice to
really
meet you,
good to see you. Yeah,
you too.
Bye.
Love you.
You too. God bless.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Thank you. Take care.
Och till er som är kvar i publiken här och har ställt frågan ifall det vi har gjort här ikväll kommer att göras tillgängligt online, så är svaret som vanligt ja. Det kommer att publiceras på YouTube inom kort och även någon gång i framtiden dyka upp i din favoritpodd Apologia-podden. Så håll utkik där, så kan du lyssna på det här igen. Kanske få repetera lite av svaren. Jag påminner igen om mina tips för att haka på i vad vi gör framöver i Apologia. Kolla in våra distanskurser. Vi kommer att erbjuda 4 stycken av dem under höstterminen. Se till att skaffa lite bra sommarlektyr från Apologias webbshop. Och till dig som tycker att apologetiken är viktig och behövs, att vårt arbete har en viktig roll här i Sverige, var med oss. Hjälp oss genom att be för vårt arbete, hjälpa oss att nå fram till rätt personer, tipsa vänner eller fiender om vår podd, om vår YouTube-kanal, annat. Men stå också gärna med oss genom gåvor av olika slag, så hjälper du oss att fortsätta göra det vi gör och förhoppningsvis också nå fram till ännu fler med det. Tack så mycket till er som var med här ikväll. Jag kommer strax lägga upp ett litet bildspel där mycket av den informationen jag just har gett kommer att vara synlig för er. Och med det vill jag tacka för att du var med på Apologia Live ikväll. Ha det så bra. Hej då.